This episode of Free Minds TV will discuss eminent domain. Alcohol seems to be very cheap in the United Kingdom. The downsides are dispatch, plus a whole lot more. All coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It is episode 140, and as always, it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
And we are releasing this on New Year's Day. Last night, a lot of people were out partying, celebrating, and ringing in the new year. Not only here in the United States and in New Hampshire, where we're broadcasting from, but all around the world. And while people were imbibing in some adult beverages, not only here in the United States, they were also doing it in the UK, where I have an article that has gotten some health do-gooders up their panties there in the wad because they're very upset that alcohol is so cheap. And while some people are swearing off alcohol forever and nursing their wounds from last night, there are still others that just can't resist a cheap beer. And that's what health officials over in parts of the UK and Wales are concerned about, is that some beers are cheaper than bottled water. Yes, there are some alcoholic beverages that you can buy for 50p per 100 ml.
That's
milliliters.
50 pence per 100 milliliters.
I got the milliliters. I don't know what 50p means.
Maybe that's 50
versus
cents.
water, which is 8p per 100 milliliters. 5p! How could this be, Nick? This is going to cause an additional 3,400 people to die each year in the UK and Wales alone, and 100,000 more people to be admitted into the emergency room.
Alcohol is going to cause that? Or
having it this cheap, having it 3p less than water. Don't you understand, Nick? People are going to die. The world is going to crumble.
Well,
we can't have this. We have to campaign at the elected officials, and not us, because we're in the United States. But if everybody, all our UK people out there, you're watching the show, you're listening to the podcast, it is time to contact your do they elect officials over there? Or are they a dictatorship?
They elect officials.
Anyways, over in the UK, it's time to contact those people and tell them, raise the prices up, because us common folk, we can't handle buying alcohol at these cheap prices. Is that you need to jack up the prices so we have to buy less, so you can save all these thousands of people each year, Nick. This is for the good of the people, for the good of everybody.
It sounds to me like an excuse to raise taxes on alcohol, because alcohol is something that there's always a demand for.
But it's going to save lives, Nick.
Yeah, maybe.
We have to do it.
How do I know if it's going to save lives?
Yeah, how do they know? These are such arbitrary numbers. 3,400 lives.
People aren't drink themselves to death if it costs a few cents more.
Well, they want it to cost at least 50p per unit of alcohol, raising the cost of a six-pack of lager to about 6 pounds. I don't know what these numbers mean. They're from the UK,
50p
Nick.
per beer is 50 British cents to a beer.
Yeah, whatever British peas are. The point is, Nick, we got to raise prices or people will die. The government officials said so.
It hasn't really worked with smoking in the United States. I mean, to some extent, I think there are some people who do quit tobacco because it's more expensive now due to taxes. But let's face it, tobacco prices have risen very quickly. People are still buying them, despite the fact that they're taxed quite heavily. And I think people need to exercise self-control instead of relying on the government to fix the problem for them. Sure, there are probably some people out there who might be helped if the price of alcohol was raised. I'm sure there are people who drink more than they should. I'm
sure there's also a lot of poor people who would be hurt if they had to pay more for alcohol, because they're going to be buying that six-pack, and then whatever is left can go towards food. They're going to get that six-pack either way, though, and so if they have to pay more for it, that's just less money for food.
And that's the problem, is that what you're doing here, and this is what government does a lot of the times, especially with this health and safety stuff, is that they're looking to force a new tax or a new ban on everybody because a few people out there can't control their drinking. So we need to increase, doing the math in my head, 50 pence times 6 beers in a six-pack, that's £3 per six-pack?
No, £6 per six-pack.
That's the total price. They want to double the price of a six-pack.
Ah, yes.
which makes a six-pack about $9–10 US, which is actually fairly expensive for beer. So essentially, they want to make beer really, really expensive, and that's going to have an effect on everybody, not just people who have a drinking problem who would be helped. People need to exercise. Well, they might be helped. I mean, you're forcing help on them.
Well, what if these people were meant to die off so that they don't spread their genes to the next generation?
There is some element of natural selection there. I think people do need to be aware of the fact that if you drink way too much, you might die.
Well, liver doesn't like it.
The other fact here, Nick, parts of your body don't
is
like
if we could do this with alcohol, raise the prices through the roof so people can't afford to buy it and get drunk. What if we could do it with other things that are bad for you, like fast food? No more dollar menu, $5 menu, $6 menu even.
It's a logical place to go.
Buying a $1 hamburger. Because what if you could buy 5 of them and eat them all? That's 2,500 calories. That's more than calories that you're supposed to eat in a day, Nick. Can't have that many calories.
I've done it.
Well,
McDonald's dollar menu.
You could die at any minute now, and I don't want to be responsible for that.
Could die.
So I think we're gonna have to raise the price of a hamburger to $5. So if you want 5 hamburgers, you're gonna have to spend $25. That's the only way, Nick.
Well, and it's a logical place to go with it. If you think that it's okay for the government to jack the price of beer way up to limit people's consumption, then why not do the same thing for people's consumption of sugary beverages like soda? Why not triple the price of soda? Soda is terrible for you.
Yeah, you know what else is also one of the most dangerous things you do every day? Getting in a car and driving. We should not only raise the price of your cheapest car to $100,000, but gasoline should be $20 a gallon so you don't have to drive as much.
And it's as bad for the planet as they say it is.
It's bad. We're going to kill the planet and greenhouse gases. Plus, it's one of the most dangerous activities you do every day. You could crash and die and burn. If we made it so people couldn't afford to drive, they wouldn't drive and they wouldn't get killed. Plus, we're going to raise the price of alcohol and cigarettes and fast food and everything that's bad for you. People will be forced to adopt healthy lifestyles and stay safe.
Well, in theory. I don't think it actually works that way.
No, we've actually seen that when you prohibit substances, you just create a black market.
And the same thing happens when you tax substances at a very high rate, too.
Well, we're creating black markets here in the United States with cigarettes, taxing them up the roof. And now there's black markets in certain states where they overtax cigarettes.
Yeah, you can smuggle cigarettes in from a lower tax jurisdiction, which is illegal, but it's what people are going to do.
It's a billion-dollar black market industry.
Yeah, and I mean, at one point in this country, you don't see it so much anymore today, but even after Prohibition ended in most parts of the United States, and it still does occur, you had people making moonshine still, especially in certain parts of, not to stereotype, but the rural South, Appalachia, Kentucky, Tennessee, places like that. One of the reasons they were doing that was not because necessarily they were providing alcohol in, say, a dry county. Sometimes that was the case. But in other cases, it was just because you had poor people who wanted liquor without paying high taxes on it.
Didn't we
and at one point in this country, taxes on liquor were higher than they were today, so it was more economically viable to do that.
I feel like we just reported on that. Maybe it was on the radio show. Where
I believe it was North Carolina where a guy was busted for like 900 gallons of hard liquor, finished product that he had in the shed.
Who cares? Why are we busting people for this?
The government cares because
I say we. Why is the government busting people for this? Why are they wasting
tax revenue?
They're wasting my tax dollars to go bust people for making alcohol that they want to drink. Well, I don't care if people want to drink their moonshine, make their moonshine, drink their moonshine, go blind. It's up to them.
It's illegal
I don't want
to make
waste
it for home consumption.
My dollars on busting him, who's probably gonna.
Oh, but the government, they're wasting your dollars, Toby. But they're also trying to protect, their revenue. Their dollars. Because when you think about it, the federal government through the ATF makes a lot of money.
Them hillbillies buy liquor just like all of us do. You got to go to a state liquor store. Yep. At least that's how it is here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, and you have to buy your liquor from somebody else who's paid the the tax stamps on it.
Yes, of course. It's all about the Benjamins.
That's a large part of the history of the United States is people moving west to avoid taxes on liquor.
Yeah, avoid the big old fat cat government officials who want to tax you for everything. It's just, you know what, Nick? People need to start looking in their own closets to find their own skeletons because everybody's got them. Everybody. I have them. You have them. Our director here probably has them. And
I'm sure he does.
All them government officials out there who are passing these laws and these busybodies who are saying, oh, alcohol's bad. Yeah, you're probably fat. Stop saying that alcohol's bad until you lose 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds. I've seen these people campaigning that make me want to throw up. Worry about their skeletons in their closets. Worry about their own health before they start going after mine. Look, I'm not a smoker, Nick. But I don't want to be seeing other smokers taxed up the yin-yang because it's hurting their lungs. You know what? Truth of the matter is, they're probably going to die before I am, and they're going to use less tax revenue in Social Security and Medicaid and all this other gifts from the government on high that they use in their old age.
There's been some number crunching that's been done that shows that smokers are actually, they're less of a drain on the healthcare system and Social Security than people who don't smoke.
Sore fatties and alcoholics. Whatever. Yeah. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die.
They pay into the system, and they don't take out of it.
Well, anyways, you know, these people, just worry about yourself for once.
And the problem is, when you start making lifestyle decisions and health decisions matters of public policy, where does it stop? What is healthy enough?
You need to exercise every day, Nick. Well, every single morning, not only do you need to eat right, but you also, and not drink and smoke and all that stuff, but you also have to exercise. And now with this new health care bill, I mean, what's going to be coming down the pipe? Because now it's everyone's wallet. Before it's your wallet, you're going to make yourself sick, you're going to have to go to the hospital, blah, 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 blah. That's between you and your wallet. But now that it's this whole everybody's health care, one size fits all, we all pay for each other's, now it's my wallet that I'm worrying about. You're eating too much and you're going to give yourself a heart attack. Well, that's coming out of my wallet, since I'm partially paying for your health care. So it's really turning neighbor against neighbor against neighbor against neighbor.
And this is what happens when you get government involved in places where it doesn't belong.
Yeah. Well, speaking, Nick, of government noses where it doesn't belong, it's all over the place. At least the federal government, most state governments and local governments as well. But the federal government, the biggest behemoth of all, at least here in the United States. There's also, I guess, the UN, which is an even bigger behemoth, but they have less power.
Most of their funding comes from the U.S. So.
Yeah, so it's just an offshoot of the behemoth of the federal government. And we try to let the viewers and the listeners of the podcast know what they can do to at least let their elected officials know what's on their mind with the Downsizer Dispatch. And I think you've got one for us this week, Nick.
Yep, and this week's Downsizer Dispatch is dealing with the Read the Bills Act. That's the flagship issue that DownsizeDC.org launched with, and since it's the first day of a new year, a new decade, I think it's important to reemphasize it. And I know we talk about this act, this proposed legislation on this show a lot, but I want to reemphasize that it's the start of a new year. And if you're new to the program, you haven't heard about Read the Bills, or maybe you haven't spoken to people about it who maybe you should consider speaking with about it. What the Read the Bills Act would force Congress to do, if it was enacted by Congress, is it would force members of Congress to either sign an affidavit swearing that they've read the full text of a bill, of proposed legislation, before they vote in the affirmative. They could still vote no. If they see one portion of it that they object to, then that's okay, if you want to just kill the legislation there. You know, if it's a bill to, I don't know, kill children, then yeah, you can vote against it if you want to. But if you want to vote in the affirmative and enact it into law so that it's binding on the American people, then you should know everything that is in that legislation. You shouldn't just be able to vote on a title, which is often deceptive. So it would either force them to do that, or if they don't want to actually read the bill themselves, that's okay. They can also listen to a clerk of the Congress read them the bill, the full text of the legislation, verbatim. So this would essentially force them to shorten these bills.
Oh, or they could vote against it.
Or they could vote against it. So it would do a couple of things here. Yes, it would favor people voting no on new legislation. Something I'm in favor of.
The lazies at least.
Right. And it would also incentivize members of Congress and lobbyists to shorten bills so that they're actually of a digestible length instead of these 1,500, 2,000 page bills that none of these congressmen, and probably no individual congressman, has actually read the entirety of. Instead of that, they'd have to be much shorter, say 20, 30 pages long. Something that can actually be understood, something that the American public actually has time to read. I mean, people will say, hey, you can go read the healthcare legislation or any other piece of proposed legislation. If you really want to, you can go online and read it. But if it's 1,500 pages and it's posted, say, 24, 48 hours before a vote's going to be taken, it would be a very difficult, almost insurmountable task to read it. And who has
let
that kind
alone
of time?
Understand it. I mean, this is legalese, Nick. This is written by lawyers for other lawyers. This isn't for you and for me to digest and understand. This isn't even for your elected official to understand. This is for lawyers to understand so that they can screw you and me and the American people out of money, essentially.
And if people like the idea of having their so-called representatives actually be forced to represent them and read legislation before they enact it into law, go to downsizedc.org and sign on to the Read the Bills Act.
It's amazing, Nick. You know, I talked to a lot of people about this, and there are a lot of people out there that think that it's a waste of time for Congress and the senators, their elected officials, to read these bills. They honestly think that that's a waste of their time. To me, it seems obvious. When I found out that they already didn't read the bills, this was many years ago, I was flabbergasted. I'm like, what? These are people I'm voting for, I'm electing to represent me, and they're not even reading what they're voting on? I was shocked by it. But apparently, a huge part of the population out there agrees with Congress and saying, oh, they don't have time to read those bills. How could they get anything done, Nick? How could they pass thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of bills every year?
They couldn't. That's exactly the point of the Read the Bills Act.
Ah, ingenious, downsizing the government. Anyways, agree, disagree, we'd love to hear it. fmtv@freemindsmedia.org is the email address. freemindsmedia.org is the web address where we have tons of archives, millions of them. Well, not millions, I guess 140 of them, as well as the radio show, ways to contact and help the show, and a whole lot more. All right, Nick, when we come back, we are going to be talking about displacing dead people for live people with eminent domain, as well as getting in over to Canada, where some big old record labels may be facing some pretty hefty lawsuits. All that and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV. And you're watching Free Minds TV.
This is William from New Hampshire Underground watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, Nick, as promised, we are going to be getting into dead people and a graveyard and an airport and eminent domain, all in the same article. What is it?
We will. Well, this is coming out of Chicago, where they have a couple of large airports, but this one specifically dealing with O'Hare. And in a major victory for the city of Chicago O'Hare Airport expansion plans, a DuPage County judge ruled Friday that the city can proceed with condemnation proceedings to acquire St. Johannes Cemetery, which stands in the way of the completion of a new runway. St. John's United Church in Christ in Bessenville, which owns the 1100 grave burial ground, had fought the acquisition, arguing it would cause great grief for the families whose dead are buried there, which seems to make sense. You buried your relatives. Some people might not care. A lot of people might not like the idea of their relatives' final resting place being disturbed so that it can be paved over and have a runway put there.
Yeah, I don't really care about that, Nick. What's irking me here is the fact that the government's taking private land from a church and giving it away to the airport. That's kind of irking me here. I don't really care about displacing the dead people so much in the family. What's bothering me is they're taking land from a private entity, this church here, and giving it to an airport. That's a little bit disturbing. That's saying, and we've talked a lot about eminent domain, especially since the Kelo decision, where essentially the Supreme Court ruled that the government can take land from a private individual or business and give it away to another private individual or business if it's for the greater good, such as higher tax revenue. Right. Very disturbing. The land of the free, that the government can take money and divvy it out to someone else.
And in this case, I mean, the airport, I'm not sure how it works in Chicago. I'm not positive. I imagine in many places the airports are actually a part of the city.
Doesn't make it better, Nick.
It doesn't really. But in many places there are airports that are private, or they operate separately from the city, even if the city sort of created them. So you are dealing with a situation where, you know, in the end, whether it's run by the city or not, you have land being taken by a church against its objections, a burial ground, and being, you know, forcibly taken and given over to the airport in Chicago so that they can build a new runway.
Is nothing sacred, Nick?
Apparently not. And I just wanted to point out that it's not just this graveyard. Last month, this village of Bessenville settled with the city, getting $16 million and agreeing to allow the demolition of over 500 abandoned homes and businesses. I don't know why they were abandoned, if they were abandoned because people were ordered out. Or
yeah, but at least they settled. I mean, they didn't have to use eminent domain. Whatever, I don't care about that.
Well, that was eminent domain. I mean, that sounds like a settlement.
Yeah, well, they got there.
I mean, they will buy you out. They do compensate you.
Yeah, so, well, to a certain extent, sometimes they come in and they force you out, though. So if there's a settlement,
well, they're still required to pay you.
Yeah, but if there's a settlement, you're making an agreement to move on. I guess sometimes it's kicking and screaming.
Well, the village is making the settlement in this case, which isn't really the same as property
Well,
owners.
I guess it's tough to say. I don't like the idea of eminent domain. It puts a bad taste in my mouth. I think it's yucky. If you are going to use it, it should be. I don't even like the idea of using it, Nick.
It's a lot
Find
more,
a different way.
Yeah, and it's a lot more dangerous now that eminent domain can be used to take private property and redistribute it to another private use. That bothers me a lot more than the taking of private property for a public good. Now, if I can argue that, my friend could put an industrial space to better use than the current occupants, I could take that industrial space from them and hand it over to my friend and his company and let him run it. Because in theory, he'll make improvements on it, or he'll attract jobs, he'll pay more in taxes. That's how tenuous the argument can be now for a public good. It used to be they at least had to say, look, we need to build a road, we need some kind of an easement granted for electricity to actually lay telephone poles, things like that, to get through. Basic services that are actually, common property, government things. But now at this point, there's almost no limit to what they can take. And it stands to reason it wouldn't just be real estate, it wouldn't just be houses and land that they can seize. But if the argument is that you can take private property, give it to another private owner, if the idea is that there's some kind of benefit to the public, then they can take anybody's property.
They could take my car or my plane?
Or your stocks or other investments that you might have.
My private jet? Oh, no. I haven't seen them do that yet. But I guess the argument could be made that it could be done. Disgusting. Anyways, different opinion, FMTV at freemindsmedia.org. I know this is another hot button issue. Some people really feel it's for the good of the people, Nick, for the good of the common good. We need to use eminent domain. Personally, I'll find a different way. Anyways, different opinion, FMTV at freemindsmedia.org. All right, moving right along, I wanted to go over to Canada, Nick, where the artists, a lot of music artists, are suing someone. And no, they're not going after the pirates and the file sharers out there. They are actually going after Canada Music and a lot of the bigger recording companies out there, such as Warner Brothers, Sony, BMG Music Canada, EMI Music Canada, and Universal Music Canada, all the subsidiaries of these bigger, larger companies over in Canada. And they're suing them for $50 to $6 billion. Why, you ask? Well, for many, many years, what these recording industries did is they would take a bunch of artist songs that they liked and they'd throw them on compilation CDs without paying the artists a penny. They did this to the tune of 300,000 times, promising to pay the artist later and never paying. Now, at the price that they agreed to, it would come to about $50 million that they would owe the artists. But the law states that every single violation of this would be $20,000 fine, which would raise the cost of the lawsuit to $6 billion. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because the recording industry, not only here in America, but also in Canada, has been vehemently going after individual file sharers who download an individual song or an album of songs and suing them for thousands and thousands of dollars per song. Now, why should they have it any differently? They're talking about suing individuals who download a song without any kind of a profit just to listen to. Meanwhile, they are stealing songs, putting them on CDs, and selling them for a profit without compensating any of the artists. Seems much worse and very hypocritical, Nick.
Yeah, and I can't necessarily speak to what's been done in the United States.
This is in Canada.
You're right. So, it sounds like the record labels in Canada, they have been breaking a contract that they made. And given the way that they do go after individual people for file sharing, for downloading songs that you didn't pay for, it stands to reason that they should be held to at least as high a standard.
Higher standards, Nick, because the individual file sharer is not making a profit. They are simply downloading a song and enjoying it.
And the recording industry is supposedly who that legislation is there to protect.
Right. And meanwhile, they're stealing individual songs from artists, promising them to pay them later, never paying them later, to thousands and thousands and thousands of songs. I say hold their feet to the fire for everything. They're talking about suing individuals for thousands of dollars per song. That's what they're doing. And meanwhile, they're stealing songs without anything. And so I say sue them for all $6 billion. I think the recording industry really needs to, not only in Canada, but also in America, all parts of really the Western world, needs to find a better way. because pirates will be pirates and they are going to be sharing in music, and they need to find another way to make revenue other than going after individuals.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's just really not practical to go after individuals. It hasn't stopped people from downloading. If the recording industries and the artists could find some way to adapt to this new business environment where you're not going to get paid a whole lot of money for for just a digital version of your song that can be downloaded online. Now, there are still fans out there who will buy CDs. Many of them download the music first or later. They have an illegal copy that they've downloaded. But if you're a fan of the group, a lot of people will buy the CD, whether it's for the artwork, on the jacket liner, whatever it is, or just to show support to the band. And a lot of people will buy band T-shirts. They attend concerts. That used to be how musicians made money for most of human history before there was a recording industry. And the recording industry hasn't been around for very long. Musicians made money by touring around, playing their music for groups of people, and in more recent times, selling memorabilia and paraphernalia, like shot glasses and T-shirts and other things that have the band's name on there. That's how you can make money. So it's not like artists cannot exist in an environment where this stuff is easily accessible, and they're not going after people and finding them and prosecuting them for it.
Yeah. Anyways, I think that the whole industry needs to change.
And we don't really need a recording industry anymore because it's so easy to take a version of a song that's been made and duplicate it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, at least here in America, in the United States, they're going after karaoke bars and cover bands and all this other crap. What a waste. Just find another way, adapt, and survive in the digital age. Don't go after individual fans. It makes no sense. Actually, I think it was 9 Inch Nails released an album for free and said, pay us what you think it's worth, and they actually got more than they would have gotten by charging $20 a pop for it, like most artists do. People said, hey, pay us what it's worth, and a lot of people took it for free, but a lot of people gave more than it was worth. So, there are other ways to make money other than forcing people to buy the CD. Adapt, adapt, adapt. Meanwhile, don't be hypocritical at the same time. Anyways, that's going to do it for us. If you have a different opinion, what's the email again?
FMTV at freemindstv.com.
No, freemindsmedia.org.
Well, either one will work.
Hopefully. Or you can log on to our website, freemindsmedia.org, and there's contact info up there. Also, archives of the show, the radio show, and everything else related. All right, until next week, it has been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.